Okay, our next presenter is going to be talking about avoiding penalties. And this is one of the more important ones. I don't want you guys to feel threatened that running for office is dangerous, that you're going to get thrown in jail, that you're going to get fined millions of dollars, because you won't. Very few people do. You know, every election cycle we have a few people who have to go in front of the election commission because they forgot to file this, they forgot to file that. We'll talk about that if that happens, but we want to avoid that because, like Mike Cole said, you don't want to give money that you could have bought flyers, poll cards, t-shirts, and send that to the state election division. So it's a waste of money. So we want to talk about how to avoid penalties, what you should and should not do, what you should and should not file, how to do that properly. Our first presenter will be Mark Rutherford, who is a former state chair. He was state chair for 8 years here in Indiana. He's a lawyer here in Indianapolis. And then our second presenter will be Todd Singer, who was the previous state chair, and he'll be talking about federal candidates specifically, because there are a lot of differences between running as a state candidate and a local candidate, and then the federal candidacy, because of our friends McCain and Feingold, it's just a totally different animal. So we wanted to bring on Todd, who's an expert at some of the federal election campaign finance law, to talk about that. So without further ado, please welcome Mark Rutherford.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Mark Rutherford with Thrasher, Bushman, Griffith, and Vocal. Glad you're all here. All of you kind of tired, full of pizza, I take it? I want everybody to stand up. Everybody stand up. Get up. Get up. While you're standing up, I want you to remember, I'm Mark Rutherford, Thrasher, Bushman, Griffith, and Vocal, PC. Okay? Now you can sit down. Okay? So now every time that you stand up or sit down, you're going to remember Mark Rutherford, Thrasher, Bushman, Griffith, and Vocal. Now I've done it, it's worth my while to talk to you. It's always worth my while to talk to Libertarians. It's wonderful to see a bright, exciting bunch of people who want to be candidates. I also talked to a couple of you who aren't so sure you want to be candidates, but you want to help candidates win. And that's very important. So what I'm going to say right now is the stuff I'm going to talk about is for the 2 or 3 people who aren't going to run. Why are you talking to me, Mr. Rutherford? Well, the reason is you've heard everybody talk about the good advice, your campaign staff. What I'm talking about is what things that the candidates, you as candidates, should have an idea that exists. And you should know that they're there. But you're going to have to get your lawyer friends who may or may not be able to do it for free. Oftentimes lawyers, though, if they like what you're doing, will do it for less. Your people like Todd Singer, even though he's not a lawyer, he's an accountant, he probably knows federal election issues in the Libertarian Party better than just about anybody else, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 people who have been in the whole party on federal stuff. Those are the people you want to get as your advisors and to learn this. One thing to remember, everybody makes fun of Indiana, and to the people on YouTube who are looking at this, I want to tell you that Indiana is a little bit more, I'll use the word progressive, than other areas in a lot of ways. One is our Secretary of State office. We have a long, long history of both Democrats and Republicans trying to run it as nonpartisan as possible. Sure, they get into a partisan tiffs, but overall, it's very good office, very good resources there. Usually it's accurate, and they have great materials on their website. The materials that you should have all picked up, I hope you did. The very last page will be my last slide that's here. It has the web addresses you go to the Secretary of State's office. Campaign guides, campaign finance manuals, the forms, statements on how you do disclosures and when you do disclosures. All that stuff is in there. It's a lot of stuff. If you're a lawyer, you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, it's Christmas, I love this. If it's all you, you go, it's this crap, it's confusing. But it's there, and it's in pretty good, usually English, not always, but usually it seems to be in understandable form. So I want you to avoid penalties in the fog of campaign finance and election laws. Who gets thrown in jail? Let's start with that. That's what everybody likes to know. The treasurer, okay? Don't tell your treasurer that because they won't do it, okay? Usually that's the way it is, but don't worry about it too much because that's reserved for the most hideous and awful examples. But one thing I want to tell you all, and one thing I think you all should understand and realize is very, very important, is that we're dealing in a political world. What does that mean? Those penalties are there. What happens when you have the unreasonable person who has the control to get the prosecutor to file charges? So you need to have these in the back of your mind, because most of the people we deal with are reasonable. We may have our partisan fights with our friends in the Republican and Democrat parties. But you got to remember that sometimes, as you've all seen in the papers and the TV, they get pretty brutal. And being fined, going to administrative hearings, going to court, in my mind, unless planned strategically, doesn't get you votes. So why do you avoid penalties and in the fog of campaign finance election laws? They're not reaching the voters. Let me tell you the converse of this. What if you start picking up steam? What if you're Rex Bell and you're starting to pull in the 30% range? That's when you get people nitpicking the campaign finance laws and filing complaints. Why? Not because you may or may not have broken a gray area in campaign finance law, or even gone so far as clearly broken one, but it's not a big deal, fine, maybe appropriate, whatever. It's because it's diverting you from your task, reaching, talking to voters. Campaign finance laws. Just going to talk about them generally. I'm not going to talk about the forms, because if you look at the candidate campaign guide, the one they have up there now is 2008 on the Indiana Secretary of State website.
Came up today.
2010 came up today. I checked this morning and it didn't come up. I'm glad it has. That's good, because it's about time for it to do so. They have a table of contents. You look at the table of contents and it lists all types of different offices. One thing to remember is do away with the old wives' tales that go around every organization and every campaign. Look on what applies to your office, because everybody's different. Some people have to do certain things, file things at certain places. Others have to do other things. For example, running for statewide office, it's kind of Byzantine, I love that word, Byzantine way to do things, because you have to file your candidate paperwork. And then you have to do financial, then you have to do statements on your personal finances. And you've got to file that at one place and take the receipt at another place. And you've got to file campaign finance forms on a periodic basis. And you do it all at the Indiana Election Division. But if you're running for Indiana House, you've got to file stuff at the Indiana Election Division, but you also have to file stuff in your home county. So every little thing is different. And if you run for some certain smaller offices where your pay is $5,000 or less, you can ignore campaign finance law. So depending on what you're doing, you need to know what the rules are. So that's why I'm not going to go into that, because that'd take me hours, and most of you wouldn't care less. Because you're going to run for township office, but you're going to run for Secretary of State. Two different sets of rules, even though it's in the same system. So you have to have the advisors who know the rules. But generally, you need to know this stuff. Campaign finance laws, you have to keep a record of contributions and expenses. Must be filed on a regular basis. When it must be filed often depends on the office. But generally, if you're a Libertarian, it's around primary time if you're already a candidate or already have what's called an exploratory committee. Exploratory committee is one where you file the paperwork saying, I think I may be running, but I'm checking it out, but I'm raising money. A regular candidate committee is one where you're going, hey, I've got the nomination, and now I'm raising money. But if those are open at primary time, and some of our candidates get tripped up on this, the primary disclosure laws for campaign finance apply to you. So think of that, before and after. The other thing that applies to us is we have conventions. Guess what? The rules on conventions apply to us too. Does it sound silly? Yes, but that's what it is. We want to avoid the fines, because filling out the form and taking the half hour to do it and getting it put in the proper place is a lot better than spending a whole day or a half day at the Indiana Election Division before the Indiana Election Commission trying to say I shouldn't be fined, or I made a mistake and I should be excused from paying the full fine. When's the other time that you have to file stuff on campaign finance law? Generally before an election. 10 days or so before an election is generally where it is, the cutoff. Some of it's 20. And also, the size of the gift or the type of gift may say when you have to file something. Because for certain races, or for most races, in the state that is, if it's over a certain amount, you've got to file something really quickly within 24 or 48 hours. And then you have to file soon thereafter the election, usually. Now, and you have to file at the beginning of every year. Those are the kind of major things to look for.